Hello everyone and welcome back to the Knight Dwarf. In this chapter we're going to look at the third move, bishop b5 check. The position after e4 c5, knight f3 d6 and here bishop b5 check is a very topical one. Perhaps bishop b5 check is the main anti-Sicilian that you're going to be facing, and whenever I see a book on the Knight Dwarf or a course and it doesn't include bishop b5 check, I always feel cheated, because it is an integral part of the Knight Dwarf players' repertoire. Many people on all sorts of levels give bishop b5 check and avoid our beloved Knight Dwarf. So I think it's important to take care of it. The bishop b5 line has been around also on the high level for a long time, but it's been considered as a very safe option, a solid option, and something that White would only do if he wanted to be extra safe. But at some point around 10 years ago, Magnus Carlsen started playing it very successfully, started playing it for advantage, and there were many followers, of course, who doesn't like to play for advantage without taking big risks. And so the variation exploded. For a while, it was the main headache of the Knight Dwarf players. But after some time, of course, Black found various ways of dealing with it, and I'm going to recommend here the move knight d7. But first, I will explain why I recommend it and talk a little bit about the other moves. The main move here is the move bishop d7, the simplest one as well. We offer the trade of bishops. Now usually White takes with the bishop, and the old main line is queen takes d7, and here White has two main setups. The older one is castle, knight f6, and then q1, knight c6, c3. White is trying to grab the pawn center, and then Black usually plays e6, after d4, take d5, d5, knight e4, White goes usually knight d2, and then we get this knight d2, bishop d2 position, where White has some advantage, space advantage in the center, but we have very good pieces. Bishop is quite good, and this position has been debated a lot. And yeah, and it's some sort of a tabia. Hard to say what's going on. Black is supposed to be very fine, but sometimes especially in faster chess, I've experienced also some problems here. But the main line these days after bishop d7, queen d7 are the lines connected with the Marocci bind, and that's what Magnus made very popular after c4. For example, knight f6, knight c3, for example, g6, d4, c, knight d4, these structures, the so-called Marocci bind without the light squared bishops turned out to be still quite poisonous for Black in the long run. But ever since these days when this just started becoming popular, Black has found various systems and ideas against this. So I wouldn't panic here, but I will explain later why I recommend knight d7 nonetheless. The other thing after bishop takes d7 is knight takes d7. This line has also become very popular recently. An alternative way of playing it turned out to be also quite interesting. I played it against Maxime Lagrave and Magnus Carlsen after, for example, castle, knight gf6, queen 2. We can often get another type of Marocci bind, let's say, for simplicity's sake, e6, d4, cd, knight d4, bishop e7, c4, such type of position. And here too, Black will try, of course, to push for a d5 break at the right moment. And according to my analysis of these positions, Black is also doing quite all right. But I will recommend the move 3 knight d7. Finally, I should also not forget to mention knight c6. It's a third option that does not have such a good reputation, because after castle, bishop d7, or q1, knight f6, both c3 and h3, Black is experiencing some theoretical issues there, but also a very playable variation, and actually a good surprise weapon. Usually White is not as well prepared against knight c6 as he is against knight d7 and bishop d7. But knight d7, I believe, is the most fitting. For the Knight Dwarf player, we are looking for sharp, complicated fight, and so to try and equalize in a simple way with bishop d7 is a little bit against the nature of the opening. We had, after all, chosen to play the Sicilian and then the Knight Dwarf. So yeah, knight d7 I feel is the most spirited solution, but it does come at a cost. White has now lots of different setups, and while I believe none of them give White objective advantage, we have to be prepared for all of them. So let's jump straight into it. It's going to be a very big chapter, I believe. The old main move here, before we start, there are 6 moves here that I consider a lot of moves, but the old main move is move d4, some sort of a, once again, a hybrid between open and a closed Sicilian. After d4 cd, queen d4, white did go for this Sicilian structure, but here the queen on d4 is very well centralized, and we don't have this usual knight c6 attacking the queen, so that's the whole idea behind it. Knight d4 here would be not ideal, then the bishop on b5 has very little purpose, and black has just a good Sicilian. After queen d4 a6, white has 2 moves. The traditional main move is bishop takes d7, but there's also a new variation, bishop e2, a very interesting line. White preserves the bishop pair and argues that his queen on d4 is well centralized, as once again the knight no longer can hit it with knight c6. Here I recommend start knight gf6, and now white has essentially two options. He can castle first, or play the ambitious c4, going for the Marx bind structure. And now I believe g6 is a very decent setup, where we'll fine shut our bishop and then obviously try to somehow prepare for the d5 push. But I like in particular a different approach, a very dynamic one, a pawn sacrifice after e5, queen e3, the only square to protect the e4 pawn properly, and now d5. Funny enough, I've played this. Funny enough, I've played this against who you find after short castle. I had mixed up the move order back in the days. I played e5, queen e3, and now d5. But this was not the point, of course. D5 makes sense after c4 specifically. e5, queen e3, d5. Yeah, now white has obviously 2 ways of grabbing the pawn. He can take it with the c pawn, c takes d5, and now we hit the queen. Queen d3, the pawn is attacked, so white has to defend it from d3, and now very strong knight g4, hitting the f2 pawn. And surprisingly, white doesn't have a good way of protecting it. Castle simply losing material after knight f2, rook f2, and now queen to b6. There is just no way to protect the rook. The queen on d3 is squared too far from that. And so white has still the move rook f1, and surprisingly white is still alright, but so is black. We play queen b6, h3, very strong. White has to force the matters. Knight takes f2, and now queen c2. The knight is a little bit trapped, but it exerts pressure on the e4 square, so we'll get it back via e4 after f5. And here, if takes f5, e4, we have lots of initiative, so white should play knight g5, trying to keep control over the e4 square, and eventually material gets traded after castle, knight c3, knight takes e4, we rescued the knight, but white is also fine after knight e4, f4, knight e4. The king is not too bad here, as our pieces are not yet very active. So here we give a check on b4, bishop d2, and now we should take queen d2, queen d2, and play knight f6, and the position gets simplified and around level. Apart from c takes d5, e takes d5 is also very critical. Of course, now we play bishop c5. Now the queen can go wherever it wants, so d3 is the most obvious square. Now we push e4, another tempo, knight fd2. Knight g5 is even more awkward. We just castle, bring the rook to e8, knight to e5. We can always hit the knight with h6. Knight fd2 is the main move. Now we castle, and knight e5. We have a very nice positional compensation. Our pieces are very centralized. We have more space in the center and the king side. And white's pawns, although are well protected, they're not marching forward just yet. B4 is not really coming. So knight c3, bishop f5. Yeah, I believe black has excellent compensation. Queen d6 followed by knight g4 is incoming. Rook from a8 will also join the game via e8. I believe black is having all the fun and very nice kingside play for the pawn. I believe that d5, e5, d5 is still a new idea, certainly a hidden one. But apart from 7 c4, white can play castle. Now e5, d5 no longer works, of course, because white hasn't wasted time on the move c4. And here, after e5, queen e3, I recommend the move knight c5. The idea is to not allow white to go c4 and knight c3, get that bind. Here white has 2 options. Knight c3 is the most obvious one, but also knight fd2, which is what Magnus Carlsen tried once. The idea is to get the bind after all, but of course this is rather unharmonious. excuse me, unharmonious, and here black has different ways of countering this, but I like the simple one with bishop e7. c4 is the whole point, castle, and now white cannot stop the counterplay, because if you play knight c3, which is the main move, we'll play knight g4, and if white plays h3, which is what Hammer tried against Ariantari in European Club Cup in 2017, white is trying to prevent everything and be super clever, but he is neglecting his development, and so here we should strike in the center. We cannot strike in the center directly, so we should first play b5, deflect the c pawn after cb, then strike in the center with d5, and black has a wonderful initiative as white's pieces are yet to be developed. Instead, 11 knight c3 is more solid. Now we play knight g4, however, a move that Hammer was so desperate to stop. And after bishop g4, we've got this light squared bishop, and we will eventually push with f5 and or slash end b5 and get rid of the bind and fight for the central squares. After, for example, knight b3, we keep the knight d7. Also keep the e6 square for the bishop. After queen d3, we go bishop to e6. And after bishop e3, we're ready to hit him with f5, fighting for the e4 square. E takes f5, bishop takes f5. And after queen d5, king h8, white cannot win the pawn with queen b7, because after bishop d3, we win it back. And after queen d1, bishop c4, we have managed to get rid of both white's central pawns. And so our control over the d5 and e4 squares is soon going to be ours. The position is perfectly fine for black here. Apart from knight f2, main move is knight c3, but that is less ambitious. Without the pawn on c4, white doesn't have such a dominance on the d5 square. So here we just play bishop e7. It is also always possible to start with knight g4 and after queen d2 go back, try to fish for a move repetition. But we can start with in any case with bishop e7. Here, if white starts with rook d1, we can play bishop d7. We shouldn't blunder knight takes e5 trick on this on this pin. We play bishop d7. Bishop anyway belongs on d7, as the knight gets the e6 square, and bishop sometimes c6 hits the e4 pawn, and also it prepares the move b5 after a4. Yeah, now after a4 castle, we are threatening to repeat moves with knight g4, queen d2, knight f6. And if white is trying to be ambitious with h3, then we have a b5, a very strong move, and after ab, rook 8, queen 8. The typical motif is that now the e4 pawn is going to hang if white takes the b5 pawn. If white tries to switch the move order around, stop knight g4 with h3, we go castle, then now white goes a4, that's clever. Now we play bishop d7. If rook d1, we are in the same spot with b5. So here white goes a5, stopping b5, but now we play the other idea, bishop c6, hit the e4 pawn. And after rook d1, knight c takes e4, knight takes e5, position gets simplified by force. We take on c3, queen c3, knight d5. We appear to win some material, as knight c6 is met by knight takes. Sorry. The arrows are out of control. Knight c6, knight c3, knight d8, knight e2, and so on. We have we're winning a bunch of tempi there, a bunch of material with a tempi. But white has a strong move, queen b3, and after d, he wins the knight on the pin. With bishop f3, he wins it back, and the position gets simplified. It's quite equal after queen c7, bishop d5. We take on d5, rook d5, and trade the active rook with rook a8, bishop e3, d5, queen d5, grab the d-file with rook d8, and after queen f3, we can play queen c6, which leads to a very fine endgame for black. Something to remember from this takeaway from the system: to start with knight c5, not allow after bishop c7, c4, obviously, and after knight c3. The key idea to remember is that we always have knight g4, knight f6 back, and if white plays h3, then we have eventually the strong bishop d7 move that prepares both the b5 push and also bishop c6. Bishop e2 solved. 6 bishop takes d7 is the main move, and after bishop d7, now white has a bunch of moves here, different ways of developing. He can try to go for the Maroczy setup. He can try to develop the knight, bishop, and castle long, and he can try to just castle short as well. Let's look at all of them one by one. Knight c3 is a clever move order. In case of knight f6, e6 setup, white keeps the option of going bishop g5 and castle long. So here we play differently. We play e5. After queen d3, we now play rook c8, a very useful move. We wait with knight f6, don't allow bishop g5 just yet. Rook c8 is always useful. White castles, and here we play h6. It's also possible to be more clever, try to play queen c7 or bishop e6 first, and try to postpone the move h6. But essentially, this is simple and it works. We just prepare knight f6 followed by bishop e7, castle, and then we want to control the d5 square with bishop e6 and so on and so forth. But let's look at the concrete variations. Knight d2. There are many different move orders, but essentially they will come down to the same thing. Knight d2 is the most accurate order for white. He's threatening knight c4, so if we are less alert, play, let's say, knight f6. White goes via c4 to e3 immediately, so we should play queen c7 first. Now he has to move his f1 rook to free the f1 square for the knight. There are two move orders here, rook d1 and h3 first. h3 was played by Nepo. As we'll see later, rook d1 can be met by bishop g4 intermezzo, which is very unpleasant for white. So h3 first makes sense. Now we go to knight f6. a4, white usually wants to stop b5 at some point, so we go bishop e7. Now rook d1. Here the rook is very comfortable. We can't hit it with bishop g4. We have to castle, and after knight f1, knight is coming to e3. There are two ways for black to solve this. You can play a simple standard bishop to e6, knight e3, and now queen to c5. And the idea is a thematic bishop d8, bishop a5 maneuver. Those who have diligently followed the course from the start and had seen the open Sicilian Najdorf positions, they're familiar with this maneuver. After a5. Queen e2 was played by Nepo twice, once against me and once against Wojtaszek. In both games, black got a good position. I even managed to win that game. I get here bishop d8 maneuver, so black was fine. a5 is critical as well. White wants to play rook a4, grab more space. After bishop d8, we have to deal with queen takes d6. So here I first play rook f8, and after rook a4, now bishop d8. Queen d6 and bishop takes a5, trading a pawn for a pawn, and after queen c5, rook c5, the d6 weakness is gone and the position is equal. After knight cd5, bishop d8. White has fine pieces, but we've got the bishop pair. All in all, it's rather symmetric and roughly equal. The other solution, in fact, here was shown by Wojtaszek. In the second game, there was no need to actually improve on the first one, but he did have a very elegant idea that he wanted to show, and that is to move d5 here. Very strong idea. Again, not the first time we see this thematic sacrifice. We want to provoke the e4 pawn to d5, and that pawn will, after e d5, block the d5 square from white's pieces. So knight d5, obviously there's going to be c2 hanging at the end of the variations, so e d5 is main move. Now knight e8, the knight is heading towards d6, where it's going to block the pawn very beautifully, and will also support the f5 push, with black having this majority on the king side, and also enormous pressure along the c file, as the c3 knight is now particularly a dumb piece that doesn't have the d5 square. Here, Jan played d6 against Wojtaszek. d6 is a strong move, trying to get rid of this pawn and restored balance. Black takes on d6, knight d5, queen c6, knight f3. At least white activated a piece, but it's no problem. We can play around it with f5, and after b3, bishop e6. Wojtaszek here blundered with a very bad move, bishop c5. After b4, he had to just go back, so it was terrible. As he later said, he was very tired at this point. There was a long match in the World Cup. He was exhausted, and so he took this inexplicable decision. But if black just plays f5, grabs some space, after b3, bishop to e6, and black is very comfortable. We want to play rook to f7, perhaps consolidating a little bit the squares even further, and we want to push f4 at some point as well. We've got these strong e5, f5 pawns that are very secure. Black is very comfortable here. So two ways against 11 h3. 11 rook d1 is main move, according to at least the number of games. And here I recommend bishop g4. a very, very strong idea to provoke the move f3. As we'll later see, the weakness of the a7 g1 diagonal is going to make a difference when we'll try to prepare the d5 breakthrough. Here white has two options, so f3, of course, the critical, or rook e1. The rook on e1 is slightly less well placed than it is on d1, and as you'll notice, we essentially will bring the bishop back to e6 and basically get the rook from d1 to e1 for free. So after bishop g4, rook e1, knight f6, knight f1, bishop e6 back, knight e3. White continues his plan, but the rook is now on e1, as I mentioned, less ideal. We go bishop e7, castle, and after bishop e7, sorry, a4, and now castle. And now, yeah, we have an even better version of that Nepo game. h3 is probably a useful move, but the rook on e1 is yeah, worse placed than on d1, so black is very comfortable. This queen c5, bishop d8 idea is incoming. 12 f3 is of course critical. Now we go bishop e6, knight f1. White continues his plan. That's his only idea, of course, in this position, to reroute the knight to e3. Knight f6. Now white has two options: either knight e3 directly, or try to be very clever, bring the bishop to e2 to f2 after bishop e3, bishop f2, and then play knight e3. Here we play d5 directly. Now e d5 is met by rook d8 when we win the pawn back, and knight d5 is met by bishop d5, e d queen c2, and we just force a queen trade. After rook c1, queen d3, rook c8 is an intermezzo, but we have king d7 in time to regain the rook. After rook d3, king takes e8, we have traded a bunch of heavy pieces, and the d5 pawn here is just a weakness in the endgame. Black's very comfortable. For the knight e3 is the main move. Now we play bishop e7. White usually goes a4, or he can try to not play a4, but if he postpones it too long, we will eventually push with b5. For example, bishop d2, castle, king h1, trying to get rid of the potential pin along the a7 g1 diagonal. And here we go b5 at some point. If white plays bishop e1 first, we also go b5. Similar, king h1, b5. If white goes a4, we go b4, knight d5, we take with the bishop. He takes d5, a5. The pawns seem like targets, but we also have our play on the king side thanks to this pawn majority, this typical neither pawn structure. So after c3, bc3, bishop takes c3, we can play g6 first, stopping any knight f5 moves, and preparing knight d7 followed by bishop g5 with good play. Rook c1, knight d7, next we want knight c5 and bishop g5. The standard Najdorf ideas that we have seen in the open Najdorf chapters. So if white, of course, doesn't prepare for b5 push, we eventually will push it. If white does, after a4, castle, bishop b2, now we prepare the d5 break. Actually, d5 first is already very good and possible, but everybody, including myself, started with rook of d8. Feels a bit more, I don't know, thought out, but it doesn't matter. d5 first is just as good. White cannot benefit from switching the move order around. But anyway, after bishop e1 or king h1 or a5, I guess all of these useful moves we will push with d5. And the idea is now that with the pawn on f3, if white takes on d5 with the pawn, we have bishop c5, and we have this pin, and this gives us time to regain the d5 pawn with an excellent position. If knight e takes d5, then we take with the bishop, and after e takes d5, if knight takes, then at the end of the line of knight d5, d5, c2 is hanging. If e takes, we have bishop b4, hitting the knight, and then the d5 pawn is falling. And this happened in my game against Michael Adams, and I was very comfortable here. I even got to press a little bit in that game. But Mickey Adams defended well, and it was a draw in the end. That is for 7 knight c3, very topical tabia. There are other moves as well. Here, of course, white can play bishop castle first. Here, that knight c3, bishop g5, long castle is no longer an idea. We can just go for knight f6 setup. If white goes for the Marosi bind with c4, we can play g6, knight c3, bishop g7. We have seen similar positions in knight f3, d6, d4, cd, queen d4 setups. Here, white can play two ways, either queen d3 or bishop g5 first. If he goes bishop g5, castle, rook d1, this was played against me by Nepo. I foolishly played h6, and after takes, he pushed e5, and he equalized. And especially since this was a must-win game, I shouldn't have blundered into this. I should have played here bishop e6, which is very strong, intending knight d5, and after queen d3, b5, when black has good counter chances, and next position after cb, ab, queen b5. Queen c7 is very strong, with threatened bishop c4. Currently, rook f8 is also incoming, the h pawn is also still hanging. So black has here very, very good compensation, excellent position. If white plays then queen d3, trying to get out of the pin, the X-ray directly, the castle. Now b5 is a serious threat again because the e4 pawn is not this well protected. b5 is always a thing. So now white plays a4, stopping b5, but white still didn't manage to consolidate as we have strong move bishop g4, hitting the knight on f3 and intending knight d7, and white will have issues after knight d7, knight e5, and rook c8 with the c4 pawn. Here, white doesn't get to consolidate his Marovsky bind. So not a good version of the Marovsky bind here with c4. Instead, white can try bishop g5, trying to stop this move g6. Now we have to play e6. Again, it's quite dangerous if white would have the long castle option, but he doesn't, so this is fine here. Here white has essentially three ways of playing. He can go for the bind with c4, knight c3. He can go knight c3 first, and he can also try to bring the knight to c4 with knight d2 or knight a3 to c4. Let's look at all of them. If knight c3, we play bishop c6 first. We can also play bishop e7, but after bishop f6, we have to take with the pawn, not to lose the d6 pawn in a bad version. But this gf is very interesting structure. This is the classical Sicilian structure from the Rouser variation. I speak about it. About this Rouser variation a little bit in the bishop g5 move 6 chapter. And but here it's quite different. We have two bishops for two knights, and white doesn't quite have the pawn on f4, so he cannot put pressure with f5. So I think this feels to me as though black has a very good counterplay, and in case of a must-win situation, I think this structure is better suited than anything because of the long-term potential. The point is that trading pieces here is usually good for black. Trading queens would be tremendous. In the endgames, the bishop pair would be worth even more, and the king safety would not be a factor. Also, black's plans include castle and king h8 sometimes. So the king safety also in the middle game could not be a huge factor here. Overall, I think this kind of position is something black can always aim for if he's in a must-win. But bishop c6 is even smoother in terms of playing for controlled game, playing for neat equality. Here white has one good idea. If he just develops his pieces with rook f1, bishop e7, rook d1, so we can castle. It's fine for black. Of course, here already after bishop f6, bishop takes f6, we have tremendous compensation in form of two bishops. And essentially, black is just doing very comfortably here. But white has a strong idea here, knight d5. Well, not as strong as it looks, but at least a spectacular idea, knight d5, that at the end leads to a balanced position. White can also start with rook e1, bishop e7, knight d5, but here we have the extra option of bishop d5, ed e5. After knight d5, however, we should go for it. Take ed5, bishop to d7. We have to hide bishop d5 would be lost to bishop f6 and queen takes d5. So bishop d7. Now white plays rook e1. Rook a1 is leads to the same thing. There's no difference. Rook e1, bishop e7, bishop f6, gf, queen f6. Hitting the rook. Also, the spin is still there. We have to move rook g8. And now white has two ways of playing. He can take on e7, queen e7, rook e1, to which we have to block the e-file, play bishop e6. And now after queen h6, the best move for white, trying to keep the queens on the board and win not only the bishop on e6, but later also the e6 pawn. And after queen h6, long castle, d4, rook e6, queen f7. Black has an exchange up for two pawns, and the king is super safe now. Position is comfortable for black. King queen h6 is also there. And this should lead to equality. We play bishop g4. After queen h7, we can play king f8. White has nothing better than queen h6, queen h6, rook g7, and queen h8, rook g8 move repetition. Trying to play for a win with king g7 is quite dangerous because of knight to d2, strong move, when the bishop on g4 is a little bit uncomfortable and the king is a bit weak. So I think if you want to play for a win, I certainly recommend to do that here with knight bishop e7. After knight bd2, followed by knight to c4. Same would be after knight a3. By the way, it's identical. We play bishop c6, knight c4, from d2 or from a3, doesn't matter. And here again, it's the same dilemma. Either bishop e7, allowing bishop f6 gf, which is again perfectly fine if you want to get a very complex, risky, but double-edged position. But if you want to just solve the opening problems, bishop e4 is really the easiest. After bishop f6, queen f6, queen e4, we win back the piece with d5. And position after queen a2, dc4, queen c4 is very equal. We play bishop e7. We want to castle next after c3, protecting the b2 pawn for the future. We go castle. And we have a very comfortable position here. There are no weaknesses. The bishop is working well on two flanks, but white knight is also pretty good on f3. It's just a completely equal position. It's not dead yet, but very, very safe for white, of course. So again, if you want to play more ambitiously, you can try bishop e7 here. Finally, knight c4. White is trying to get some sort of a Marusi bind. It's playable for white, of course, but we will get our counterplay here. We'll go h6 first, asking white to decide what to do. If he takes on f6, now we take with the queen. Of course, doubling pawns in the endgame is perfect for black. Then the two bishops are worth even more than with the queens on the board, because the potential issues with the king are no longer, with the king's safety, are no longer relevant. e5 was played in Almodiakis strategy, but after d9, e5 long castle, black was already better thanks to his bishop pair. Next one, play bishop e8. King is just very comfortable on the queen side as well here. 16 bishop e3 is also there. We can play bishop e7, knight c3 castle, rook f2 d1, for example, bishop c6. There are different setups. So there is the bishop c6 setup, which I find very harmonious. It works very well here. But there is also the setup with queen a5, rook fc8, and then bishop to e8, hiding the bishop on e8, allowing knight d7 regroup as well, knight d7, knight c5, or knight e5 or c5. And also b5 push, of course, is always there on the agenda. So two plans, queen a5, rook f8, bishop e8, or bishop c6. Bishop c6 is my main. And after queen d3, we can again play queen a5, rook f8. But very strong here is knight g4, a very original move. Usually knight is heading towards d7, but here we can go with the tempo to g4, and after bishop f4, we have a very strong move f5. And this happened in corresponding game between Lata and Benes in 2014, when black managed to get an unusual sort of counterplay here, challenging the central e4 pawn and activating his bishop and his rook, his f8 rook. This led to a very good position for black. 10 bishop h4 is also a retreat. Now we play bishop e7, knight c3 castle. b5 is very much an idea. And after rook d1, we should be a bit careful. There is a threat of bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and e5 when the bishop on d7 is hanging. So we play bishop c6. We don't allow this trick, and we want to push b5. And if white goes for a4, if white goes for a4, we can bring the queen to b4 with queen a5, queen b4, when bishop on h4 is on the sidelines. So this h6, I think, very good idea to check first where the bishop is going. And I think this concludes 7 short castle. 7 bishop g5 is a very strange, very ambitious and very risky move. The bishop often gets kicked away eventually with h6 g5 to g3, where it will be half out of game, so very risky for white. h6, bishop h4, rook c8. In fact, I saw not so long ago there was a game between Duda and MBL, and Duda got lost position without having made any obvious mistakes, because just the position is just very risky. Anyway, so bishop h6, bishop h4, we play rook c8 first, flexible move, knight c3. If white plays the simple move short castle, funny enough, the first line of the engine here, I think, is a move f6. It's funny, a funny move, but there's no need to be fancy. You can play queen c7, and we intend e5 and g5 when the bishop will be out of play with g3. White usually goes for long castle plans with knight c3, and now we want to shut the bishop off, and we have the strong move order e5 first, using that bishop d8 is losing to e4 when both pieces are hanging. And after queen d3 we have the g5 push, and now the bishop on g3 is pretty bad. We play just knight f6, and then we want to bring the queen out to b6 or a5, put pressure on the queen side. White can try to play h4. We go g4, keep the bishop still out of play, and after knight d2 there are lots of options. I like the flexible move bishop e6, h5, queen a5. Here Duda sacrificed the h5 pawn with bishop h4, but after knight h5 he didn't have any compensation and lost quickly. While after 15 a3, which happened in a game Zarnitsky-Matlakov from World Rapid 2019 in Moscow, here I propose to improve on the game of Maxim with bishop e7, with an interesting idea that after long castle, we can simply castle short. And we have such tremendous initiative coming on the queen side, while white is actually not able to use the fact that our king appears somewhat weakened with the g-file here. These squares with the squares in front of the king sort of wide open, but white cannot really access them. And so if white goes, for example, for some f3, f4 business, we can play rook c6 followed by rook f c8, and already threaten some serious stuff on the c file, such as exchange sacrifice. So this bishop g5, very risky move, not something I would be worried about. Finally, 7 c4. I recommend knight f6. There are also also e5, I think, is a system, but I recommend knight f6. We want to play for g6, bishop g7 setup. After, for example, knight c3, we go g6, castle, bishop g7. We looked at position via 7 short castle move order. And if white plays bishop g5, we had seen something similar in the short castle system as well. Again, we play e6, knight c3, bishop e7, castle, castle. Now there we had included h6 a little earlier, but it doesn't matter much. After rook of d1, we can still play bishop c6. Again, we don't fall for bishop f6, bishop f6, e5 trick. Play bishop c6, and eventually after queen d3, useful move, intending knight d4, we do ask the bishop once again where it goes. And after h6, white is likely to transpose with bishop h4 or bishop e3 to what we had looked at. While if white uses the extra option with bishop f4, sorry, we can hit him with b5 and get lots of counterplay once again against this e4 pawn. b4 is already threatened. So not too complex. What I do think is important is that you remember the very first moves here. So bishop g5, we go h6, rook c8, and knight c3, we have e5, g5. But particularly at knight c3, castle, and c4 are a little bit confusing. After c4, we can play knight f6. After castle, we can also play knight f6. But after knight c3, we don't want to allow knight f6, bishop g5 position with long castle. So that's why after 7, knight c3, we play e5. So again, castle, knight f6, c4, knight f6, but knight c3 is e5. I hope you understand the logic behind this. If you don't memorize it by heart, you can still figure it out during the game where you play what, because there was a point we avoided this knight c3, bishop g5 long castle setup. Okay, I think that covers the fourth move d4, which is a major move, one of the old main lines. Now let's look at a few obscure moves. There is the fourth move a4. An interesting idea, became very fashionable recently. I think I was the first one to introduce it at the highest level when I played against Vashila Graf, European Team Championship. I wanted to, it was an important match for our team, so I wanted to find a position where I would get a complex struggle, where I could hope to try and outplay him. It didn't really work. Maxim played well, the game was drawn, but the line with a4 caught some popularity. Magnus later played it as well. And the idea is simple. White wants to bring the bishop back to e2 after eventual a6. And he wants to restrict black on the queen side, not only stop a6, b5, but sometimes even push the pawn to a5, even block the b6 push. So very interesting positional system. Here I recommend knight f6, knight c3, and g6. There are many ways. One of the most principled lines is a6, bishop e2, and now b6, trying not to get under a5. Then white plays d4, cd, queen d4. Black chooses between e6 and e5 setups. This is definitely something to look into, but I recommend a simpler approach. Also, the line that I played against Magnus in a must-win situation when he used the system to play it safe against me in the last game of our match at the, I think this match took place in the Chessable Masters online tournament. There are so many of them that I'm getting really confused. Played already so many matches with Magnus this the year 2020. Anyway, a5. So 5g6, a5. Sorry. Starting with castle is the same. We're gonna play bishop g7. A5, bishop g7, castle. Same as castle, bishop g7, a5. And now I play a6 before castle. This is a slight nuance. If we castle, white might go rook e1, a6, and bishop to f1, which feels like a slightly better placement of the bishop than on e2. So this is why I played a6 here. A small nuance. If white takes on d7, we take with the knight, and eventually we'll not mind to play b5 and break our pawn structure this way. I'm not too worried about the a6 pawn in these positions, as you will see. So white went bishop e2 here. Also after bishop c4, we can castle, and after d3 play b5, ab knight b6, and the bishop before bishop on c4 seems more active than it is on e2, but is now a target, already gets hit by the knight. So it's not so simple for white. Bishop e2 is the main move. That's what Magnus played against me. Castle. Here I think white can start with d3 as well, but Magnus started with rook e1. Regardless, black plays b5, ab. We are fine to allow this a takes b6. Capture the weak a6 pawn is not a big concern, I believe, after bishop b7, d3. I recommend the move a5. I played myself, in fact, knight takes b6, I believe. Yes, I took with the knight, and you can also take with the queen, in fact, but a5 is the most flexible. That's what Grishuk played later, waiting a little bit for white's reaction, and then we'll decide to take with the queen or with the knight. For example, if the c1 bishop moves, we might take with the queen and hit the b2 pawn, and otherwise we take with the knight. And the point is that this so-called weak a pawn, eventually, which is what happened also in my game against Magnus, when we take with on b6 with the knight, and then play bishop c6, and then push the pawn to a4, it will be very well protected, very far advanced, and the b2 pawn, in fact, will be just as much a target as the a4 pawn, if not more. So I think a very fine position. Also, white's a little cramped here. The bishop on e2 and pawn on d3, knight on f3, pawn on e4. Somehow a little bit cramped. Not pieces don't breathe free. So a little passive position for white. I was not concerned here, and I managed to win this game against Magnus, which was great for me, of course. But yeah, I think a pretty good solution against this a4 line. There's also the move for c4. White is showing black that he's going to go for the Maroczy bind, which is fine by me. We go knight gf6, knight c3, and g6. e6 setups also possible, but I think g6 works very well here. And here there are two ways of playing. White can play for the Maroczy setup directly with d4, or he can try to be very clever and postpone d4 and play castle after bishop g7, make some useful moves like bishop a4, castle, now maybe h3 first. This is what Safarli played against me in Shamkir Gashimov Memorial 2016. But here I felt that white is trying to postpone d4 for too long, and I decided to use that. I played first knight b6, forcing the bishop to b3. Bishop is protecting the c4 pawn, but it looks very awkward on b3, of course. And now I pushed e5, locked the center, and after d3, knight e8. First of all, I want to bring my knight to e6. The bishop on b3 still looks quite sad. And besides knight coming to e6, I of course also want the King's Indian f5, f4 plans. Here my opponent made a mistake. He went bishop g6, bishop g5, f6, bishop e3, and just asking for f5, which is what I played. And I got a very good position and won a very smooth game against Altash Safarli in 2016 here. So I think this castle h3, bishop a4, all this too sophisticated. 6d4 a bit more direct. Now we take with cd4. Funny enough, after queen d4 we have a direct transpo with bishop g7, bishop d7, bishop d7, castle, castle, queen d3, and now, for example, a6, and we transpose to something we already looked at. This arised from the fourth move, d4, cd, d, queen d4, a6, bishop d7, bishop d7, 7, castle, knight f6, c4, g6. So queen d4 with transpo, knight takes d4 is a separate move. Now we go bishop g7, castle, castle, finish development. The bishop of d5 is sort of a little bit awkward, out of play. White has to give it up. Bishop d7, and queen d3. This is a pretty good attempt at stopping a6, b5 counterplay. If white plays b3, a6, a4, there is the b5 push. The point is that after all the captures, so often in the end of the day, the e4 pawn is hanging. So queen d3 is the clever line. After a6, h3 is the clever move. Otherwise, knight g4, knight e5 was also a thing. In general, it's a threat, knight g4, knight e5, and queen moves, then rook c8, after b3, the b5 push. So it's a typical idea. h3 is clever now, stopping knight g4. Now we go rook c8, threatening queen c7, if b3, then b5. So white has to go do something about it, play a4. And here, now that white stopped the b5 ideas, we switch to e6, d5 plans, typical idea, e6, b3. It's an important move for white. And now we go d5. It's a temporary pawn sacrifice, but it equalizes by force. After cd, we go queen c7, a strong intermezzo. If de things work out, we take on c3, e d7, knight takes d7, and the b3 pawn, of course, is falling after some knight c5 is also incoming. So after queen c7, white should go bishop b2, protect the c3 knight. Now we take on d5. Important point of the move queen c7 is that now after bishop b2, e d5, the e5 is no longer there. And after e d5, the d5 pawn is very, very weak. And after queen c5, it will eventually fall. If white tries to hang on to it with knight d2, we have queen b6 and b3 pawns also hanging. So yeah, all this works out very well for black. Because c4, we just go for knight f6, g6 setup. For bishop a4 is also a very vague line, new line. White's trying to confuse black. Go to a4 before a6 already in advance. Then after, usually tries to go c3, bishop c2 anyway. Usually this transposes to castle, a6, bishop d3, knight f6, c3, bishop c2 line, which we will see later. So bishop a4 usually transposes, but let's see move by move. So knight gf6, we play castle. Yeah, this is white's idea. Knight e4 very dangerous here because rook e1 d4 comes, and white gets lots and lots of play. For the pawn, it's too dangerous. We play e6. And here, rook e1 is the main move, but very interesting idea is c4. It's sort of a bluff. We can, of course, just finish development with bishop e7 and just castle. And it's okay at these positions. As the bishop on a4 is quite artificial. In this, this is already Marasi sort of a hedgehog potentially hedgehog setup. But with e6, c4 included, knight e4 is actually working. But it leads to a very complicated position. So if you go for this, you should remember a little bit of that. So rook e1, knight ef6 back, now d4. Yeah, here black can, of course, play the safe move bishop e7, while white has some compensation, but not as dangerous as after cd. But after cd is much more ambitious, of course, knight d4, bishop e7, rook e6. Again, black can bail out and try to castle, but fe is actually working, accepting the sacrifice. This has been played by Eric Hansen with white against Šarić in FIDE Grand Swiss 2019 in Isle of Man. Knight takes e6, queen a5, and here Eric played a very strong, confusing move. I mean, Nd7 directly doesn't bring much, but a strong move is c5, very confusing. And here Black has a very strong response with b5 first, trying to distract the c-pawn, from c takes d6, invite c takes b6, and if bishop b5, then the bishop is sometimes hanging. Not yet though, because of knight c7. So here we play king f7, a very strong move, threatening the bishop. Otherwise bishop d2 would trap the queen. So king f7 is good. Knight g5, now we go king f8. Knight e6 back. If white takes on d6, we can take on b5, de, and just hide with king e8. Black has an extra rook here still. White doesn't have enough compensation. With knight e6, Black can also start playing here for a win with king g8. After bishop c4, again bishop d2 is threatened, trapping the queen. So we go queen to b4. The queen now gets some squares. So bishop b3, we play knight e5. There is no dangerous discovery here. Bishop d2, queen b8, knight c7, king f8, knight takes a8. White is winning back some material, but we played dc5. The knight is still trapped. We are currently in exchange. No, we currently have equal material, excuse me. And after queen takes a8, will be a piece up. White tries to hang on to his material with the bishop f4, keeping the e5 knight under attack. But now we go g5, trying to divert the bishop from the e5 knight. If bishop g3, we play bishop d7. The knight is going to be picked up by the bishop now. White goes queen e2, trying to put pressure on the knight. Now we go knight e4. After bishop e5, queen e5, knight d2, white is once again trying to use the pin along the e file to win back the knight. But we play here bishop d6, hitting the h2 pawn, and after knight f3, queen f6. Finally, we have stabilized our position, and it's a beautiful position. All of a sudden, our king is pretty safe. The knight is still hanging, and we want to push g4 sometimes as well. So Black is kind of winning here, actually. So this sacrifice doesn't work, but it's very spectacular for sure. So good to know about it. a6 rook e1 is the main move. Now after a6, if white plays c3, after b5, bishop c2, c4, we transpose to for short castle, which we'll see later. And if white goes for the bind with c4, bind is not ideal here. White is committed also to the move rook e1, wasted some time on that. If he wants the bind, he should start with 4 c4 and then knight c3 d4, as we had seen. Here we go bishop e7, knight c3 castle. And after d4 cd, Black is doing very well. If white takes with the queen, we play queen c7. We want to go bishop b7 when white's pieces are very strange to place. Bishop on a4, queen on d4, all misplaced while we have this harmonious hedgehog setup. Hedgehog is called because of these pawns, which are like needles on the hedgehog. And if the knight takes d4, we play queen c7. The c4 pawn is in some trouble, and white cannot never play b3 because of b5, so the bishop is very awkward here. If queen e2, we go knight e5. White has to play bishop b3, which is terribly ugly. Bishop is like a big fat pawn here. And we can, we can already send the knight to g6 or play rook e8 first, anticipating f4, and now sending the knight to g6. And there's plenty of counterplay. Currently, we might want e5 and simply develop the bishop with b6, bishop b7. Again, the sort of normal position, normal Sicilian hedgehog position, but the bishop on b3 is completely out of place here. That is for bishop e4. And again, important thing after knight e6 castle, want to take yet on e4, play e6, and take only after c4. And finally, let's look at short castle and c3, two other main moves. So for c3 first. Yeah, this is an old system that remains very principled. It's probably the only system where white gets the c3 d4 pawn center in this whole bishop b5 check. I think it actually is. So it is very principled. We play knight gf6 here. There are now two options. There is the traditional queen e2 move, and the newer approach, bishop d3. D3 here makes no sense. I didn't even mention this move. Yeah, D3 makes no sense because we'll just go for G6, Bishop G7 setup after A6, B5, and yeah, this will be a waste of time. So White generally tries not to waste this move on D3. Let's look at Bishop D3 first. White wants to save the move on Queen E2 and bring the bishop to C2 and push D4. But here we haven't played A6, and we will not play A6 anymore. So we win some time with Black. I propose to go G6 here, but also possible are other setups, but I like G6. In general, I will recommend G6 very often in these positions. I believe bishop on G7 is very well placed in these slow Spanish type positions. Yeah, already. Yeah, these systems we're going to be looking at from now on for the rest of this chapter are positional systems where White is trying to play in the style of the Spanish Sicilian. Sorry, Spanish. Spanish is not Sicilian. Spanish is the opening after E4, 1, E4, E5. White just wants to bring the bishop to C2 and play C3, D4, grab space in the center, and not allow the Sicilian structure where we trade the C pawn for the D pawn. So different structures. Yeah, here bishop E3, G6. Bishop C2 is the main move. There's also castle with idea rook E1, bishop F1, and D4 also possible. Now we go bishop G7, rook E1, castle, bishop F1. Here we can play E5, and after D4, EDC, DCD, take everything on D4, knight D4, and now strike with D5. I'm trying to trade all the central pawns and get a good position. After E5, knight E4. White has two options. He can play F4, then we go knight DC5, followed by F6, with a roughly level position. And White can play also F3, after which we sacrifice the piece with knight E5, FE, DE, and there are all sorts of tricks here, and it's a fascinating position that I believe you can investigate further if it interests you. But the easier solution that I recommend is knight E5 instead of E5. Now if White goes D4, we have strong reply, knight F3, Queen F3, CD, CD, and now Queen B6. And suddenly White doesn't have a good way of dealing with the D4 pawn, because bishop E3 is not possible because amongst other issues, B2 pawn is hanging, and also knight G4, of course, is there. So D4 is bad. White should take on E5, D5, D3, and play this position. But this is quite a passive position for White. We have this space here. Now all of a sudden we are the ones with some sort of a spatial bind. Here, yeah, we can start with B6, and we have many different plans. We can reroute the knight to D6 via E8 and D6, or we can play Queen D6, Bishop A6, bring a rook to D8, and force White to defend the D3 pawn. The knight from F6 can sometimes go to H5. In the long run, we might go for the F5 push. I believe this is a comfortable position that is very playable, certainly, and offers Black very good chances. That is for castle and rook 1, bishop F1. 6 bishop C2 is also there. Now we go B5. I really like the fact that we didn't need to spend a move on the move A6. We just got the space here. And here White can also start with D4 or start with castle. Yeah, D4 is not so pointless. White wants to protect the E4 pawn with the B1 knight. After CD, CD, bishop B7, he wants to play knight BD2. Knight C3 would be met by B4 when the E4 pawn is in trouble. Knight BD2, bishop G7, castle, castle. Yeah, now White plays rook E1, logical. And here we play E5, which is a good improvement over the game Castellanos Vascella Graf from World Rapid 2019. And the idea is that after D5, A5, now we get a proper Spanish structure. I will show here briefly, because I speak all the time about the Spanish. I'll just show you what it is. Spanish E4, E5, knight 3, knight 6, bishop B5. And in particular, the variations from the close Spanish are very resemblant of this. So let me set up, for example, a Breyer variation, so-called Breyer system. That is this knight B8, knight D7 line. And for example, just to give you an example of what I'm comparing these things with constantly, this is the main tabia of the Briar Spanish. We see the structure e5 d6 against this e4 d5, or here this pawn center against this 3 pawns. Similar also the Spanish Chigorin variation. Now white sometimes, black sometimes trades the c pawns and gets such position, or sometimes keeps the c pawns on the board and then gets some sort of position like that. But compared to these positions, we haven't wasted moves with the knight before pushing c5, as we played move c5 and move 1. And also, so often, like here, the bishop gets rerouted to g7 by so many moves, whereas we often do it in one go, like in the lines that we are currently looking at. Bishop went to g7 right away. So, compared to these Spanishes, compared to these Spanishes, we have a very good version. Yeah, and here we want to play b4, knight comes to c5, bishop comes to a6, queen comes to b6. A very comfortable position for black, and lots of counterplay here for black. There is 7 d4. 7 short castle is also there. Now we go bishop b7, rook e1, bishop g7, d4, and now castle. In general, basically the rule of these positions is that if white doesn't get, if e5 is not dangerous, then we have very good version, and we can at any moment choose to push e5, allow d5, and get these very good versions of these Briar Spanishes that I just showed. Here, e5 can be met by d, knight g4, and after e6, fe, there is huge pressure along the f file. These double pawns are ugly, but it's more than compensated by the counterplay along the f file. Bishop is a monster, rook is a monster, knight d5 is coming. a4 is better to include, a6, now e5. Here we take, play knight g4. Trading some stuff along the a file is helpful for white, as his queenside is underdeveloped. AB, rook a8, bishop a8, e6, fe6. And here again we have that very strong pressure along the f file. After h3, the easiest is to take on f3, bishop f3, gf, play knight h6. After rook e6, reroute the knight to f5. And here, white also has now tremendous weaknesses, and position is around balanced. White has, of course, the bishop pair, and our pawn structure also not ideal, but yes, with this weak king and the pieces still not developed, we're doing quite well. So yes, the problem with bishop d3 is that we go b5 without having to play a6. Now queen a2 is the old main line, still the most critical. A6, bishop a4, b5, we get the queenside expansion. Bishop c2. Here, compared to 4 castle, as we will see, c4 is what we will play in those positions there. Here it's too risky. Queen is already putting the pressure on this pawn. So after a move like b3, it will be not easy to maintain this pawn on c4. Here we allow white to push d4. We go bishop b7, and after d4, there are 2 setups. But in general, I'll probably recommend the g6 setup as the main setup. Whenever we'll get the Spanish structures with e5, if we ever choose to do that, the bishop on g7 is usually better placed there, not necessarily so much because the bishop on g7 is so great, but more so because eventually in these structures, this knight comes to g3, from where it will aim for f5, and then you very often need the pawn on g6. And once you have the pawn on g6, of course, you have these weaknesses around your king, so you then want to keep the bishop on g7. So this is the justification behind why g6, bishop g7 is often a good idea in these Spanish structures. Let's look at both options. e6 is fine, castle bishop e7. Here, it's very important if white goes for rook e1 or knight bd2 setup, that we go queen c7 and we don't allow him knight bd2 because of cd4. And cd4 is met by queen takes c2. So we force him to lose a move. First, let's see what happens if 10 bishop f4. Here we can also play queen c7. We postpone this. Don't not allow white to play knight b2 just yet because of cd, and white once again cannot take it because the bishop is hanging. So here white has to go rook c1. Now castle, knight b2, and here we play e5. And now the bishop is also trapped for a trade after bishop e3 knight g4 or bishop g3 knight h5. And of course, white isn't happy to lose his bishop, dark squared bishop, especially in these Spanish structures. Yes, after q1 we play queen c7. Now knight d2 cd is a problem for white, so he goes bishop d3, getting out of this x-ray along the c file. Now we castle. Jesus, sorry. Oh my god. Sorry, my arrow drawing skills are terrible today. Bishop d3 castle, knight b2, rook f8. A useful move. Knight f1. White is trying to get his Spanish setup. Now we go e5, and d5 c4. Yeah, d5 is not dangerous because d5 square is well protected. And otherwise, you want to take everything on d4, drop the bishop, and put pressure on the e4 pawn. So d5 is what white plays. Now we go c4, get the tempo in, square for c5 for the knight. And after bishop c2, a5. Yeah, we have this good version of the Briar, but I'm going to recommend you to get an even better version of that by starting with 8th move g6. But as we've seen, e6 is also perfectly fine. Yeah, now the only problem with g6 is that there are sometimes this e5 systems, e5, e6 pushes and so on, that have to be taken into account quite seriously. Now, okay, let's look at e5 first. This is very messy. We take on f3, gf. White usually has to play like this because if he takes with the queen, then e5 pawn is not sufficiently protected. So after gf, we can play knight h5. It's an interesting idea here. Now after ed, we go cd. If white plays cd, we just go e6, so we'll regain the pawn, and this will be a disaster, of course. Now white plays d7, bishop e7, and bishop h6. He has to stop us from castling short. And here there are two ways. You can play knight df6 and knight g8, kick the bishop away, and then come back to f6 and hope to castle. Or we can play knight c5, cd knight e6, and the knight on e6 is doing a great job hitting the d4 pawn, and this is also alright for black. That is for knight e5. Castle is main, bishop g7. Again, e5 is critical. But let's see first if white plays it simple, which is what most likely will happen in your games. I believe most white players who play these systems, they are a little bit lazy. They just want to play rook e1, knight d2, knight f1, just play slow Spanish. But then we have them where we want to have them. We have best version we could ever get. So rook e1, castle, knight d2. We can get a better version here of the Spanish by playing e5 at any moment. But I like also to include queen c7. And after knight f1, rook c8, threatening cd, threatening cd and the c2 bishop in the end. So now we force white to make one more move with the bishop, waste one more move. And now we take, play e5. Again, the ed followed by rook e8 is a positional threat. So white has to go d5. And now knight c5, another tempo on the bishop. Here we're threatening to take bishop d5, ed and e4, the simplifying push. And if white drops this bishop back somewhere, we'll go b4, a5, bishop a6. And have a fantastic position on the queen side and also on the king side. We're very happy to have this pawn on g6, bishop on g7, as I mentioned, because after knight g3, the knight will not have these squares. So I think this is actually a very likely scenario that you will face, and then yeah, you're doing fantastic. 10 a4 is there. Here we can include c takes d4. The c takes d4 usually takes the sting out of the e5 push, but more ambitious is to castle. And again, hope white doesn't play e5, but if he does play e5, we are also fine. We take on f3, taking with the pawn is again obligatory. Now I play knight h5, a b5. Here we have a strong response cd. We want to take with the bishop on e5 in case white goes after our queenside pawns. Then after bishop e5, we'll have well, tremendous position on the king side, and the pawn on the queen side is not queening just yet. So CD is the main move. Now we go AB, Rook A8, Queen A8, E6. A very concrete play. We play here Knight B6. We want to meet Bishop B3 with Knight C4. EF7, Rook F7. Now Bishop B3, we have Knight C4. And if White takes on B5, we have Queen F3. We can also play, well, keep more tension with Knight D5 and if need be E6. But Queen F3 is solving the problems by force. If White takes the Knight, we have a perpetual check with Queen G4, Queen F3 back. And if White plays Bishop D1, we drop the Queen back. Bishop B3, hitting the, well, challenging Black on the diagonal. Here we play D5. And after Knight C3, we can play the simple E6, but there is a forcing solution with Queen C8, very strong move, threatening once again to deliver a perpetual here. And that is for this move 10A4. Again, Black can also take first on B4 and castle. There's also 10th move Rook D1. That's very possible. Here we can castle as well. I've looked at that as well in great detail. But after E5, Bishop F3, White can take with the Queen. D takes E5 and D takes C5. And this is fine for Black, but it requires a very strong play from us, and it's not any longer as funky as positions where White doubled his F pawns. So this I'm not a fan of. After Rook D1, I propose to finally take on D4, take on castle, and now after E5, Bishop F3, Queen F3, DE, there is no more D takes E5. Here White plays A4. Of course, if not for E5, we are not thrilled to release the tension, but it's not a big deal either. So White can play here 12 A4. Now we can play Knight B6, which is more ambitious, but Black was fine in a game between David and Papaioannou with Queen C7, hitting the bishop, and after Bishop D3, E5. This led to massive simplifications, and Papaioannou successfully equalized. But again, Knight B6 here is more keeping the tension into place for more complications. And finally, direct 10 E5, the most testing and the most challenging move. D E5, Bishop F3, GF. And here we can play Knight D5 and Knight H5. Knight D5, E6, F8, Queen E6, Knight 7 to B6, intending Queen D7 or Queen C8. So it's fine for Black. It's a trade-off again for the light squared bishop, but he has bad kingside pawns. Knight H5 is also fine. Here there are two options, E6 and Rook D1. Rook D1 first is definitely playable. Queen C7, we get out of the pin. E6. If White plays F4, we play Bishop H6, keep the pressure. We first castle. And then we'll play Bishop H6, keep the pressure on the F4 pawn. After E6, we take F6, Queen E6, and we have Knight E5. And the line continues with F4, Knight F3 check. If King G2, we have Knight H4 check as well. And after King H1, we have Queen C8, offering a queen trade. And the upcoming endgame Black is very fine. The F4 pawn is a weakness, and yeah, that compensates for the bishop pair. E6 is the most direct after Knight H5. Now we take on E6. After Queen E6, Queen B6 worked fine in Kravtsev Jan, Albania 2014, but Rook B8 followed by Rook B6 is even more ambitious and also fine for Black, trying to kick the queen away and keep the queens on the board. 14A4 is possible and critical as well. Now King F7 is pretty good. Rook B8 is also an alternative. King F7 works fine. King is quite safe here. And after Rook E1, Queen B6, we guard the E6 pawn, and after Knight D2, here we have a strong regroup Knight E4. Because Knight E4 is coming. Knight E4 would be quite tricky. We have Knight E4 first. After Queen E4, Knight D5. We have taken away that E4 square from the knight, and next we want to bring this knight to F6 with a complex but fine position. So all this stuff is very complex and fine and double-edged. But the main point here is that if White dodges the challenge with, and doesn't play E5, or plays like Rook E1, Knight D2, then yeah, we have a fantastic Spanish incoming. And if you're scared for some reason with e5, e6 business, you can always go for e6 stuff. If you're, let's say, if you're less worried about the Spanish positions, closed ones, but want to prioritize stopping e5, e6, then yeah, e6 is definitely perfect choice for you as well. That is for 4c3. Now finally, for short castle, the main line. Well, I don't know main or not. All of these moves are main lines, but yeah, of course, one of the main lines. a6. If white takes on d7, then after bishop d7, d4, cd queen d4, we transpose to 4 d4 line, where we take on d4, queen d4, a6, take, and then castle transposes directly into here. So in independent line after castle a6 is the bishop d3 line. And this was very, very challenging for a while. A few years ago, everybody played this, and even black was struggling to find equality, but time has passed, and black has found the right way forward here. By the way, I should mention why we start with a6 first. If we start with knight gf6, there is the option of rook e1, a6, and now bishop to f1, the extra option, which he doesn't have after a6 immediately. So a6 a little bit simpler, bishop b3, knight f6. And here white has two move orders. The natural c3 followed by bishop c2, and at some point white has discovered rook e1, and the idea is that if black plays b5, then white might strike with c4, and that was quite topical at the high level for a while. So both these move orders have some independent value. After c3, b5, white plays bishop c2, bishop b7. If queen e2, he transposes to this c3 line that we saw. So I was not entirely correct saying that 4 c3 is the only way where white gets the pawn center. In this move order, he can also get that same pawn center, of course. Besides c3, b5, bishop c2, bishop c2, bishop b7, rook e1 will transpose to position we look under. I think, let me see, 1 second. How exactly it transposes? Not yet, I think. Yes. So bishop c2, bishop b7, rook e1 will transpose to 6 rook e1 after c4, a4, and here e6. And now we transpose, yes. Yes. Sorry, therefore, small confusion. Also in this move order, there's extra option with e5, but e6 is just simpler to transpose to what we will look at in a moment. Yes, c6, c3, b5. Now 7, a4 is the extra option white has in this move order, and it's very tricky. Very tricky. I faced this against Hare Krishna in fact in 2019, and I got confused with this move order. I should have spent a bit more time, but I looked for a couple of minutes, and I got very confused. I went for c4, hoping after bishop c2, bishop b7 to transpose, but after c4, Hari played a very strong move, bishop to e2, and I got in some serious trouble in that game, and I was very lucky to escape. Instead, it's important to start with bishop b7. We always react to a4 with bishop b7. In fact, as you will see, also with rook e1, e6 included. So that is a very important move order, a very important thing here to play bishop b7. And in positions with rook e1, e6, c3, b5, a4, as you will see as well, also bishop b7 and not c4. So that is very, very, very important. Now, in fact, I had actually, I of course saw this at some point, but I had a little bit mixed up the things. So here, this allows a very interesting option: AB, rook a8, queen a8. We always take with the queen, reinforcing the pressure on the e4 pawn. And after bishop e5, bishop e4, there is this very spectacular piece cycle with d4. And I had decided that I can maybe avoid it, but I could not. So we have to really study it. So here we have to take the piece. White goes d takes c5. Of course, the reason why I sacrificed a full piece is because we are quite behind in development. We need a few moves still to get the bishop out and castle. So we have to be very careful here. c6 is currently a threat, or potential threat, so we go bishop c4. Bishop comes back to the game. Here there are two options, cd and rook e1. cd is 1, now we take on f3, gf3, ed6. Our king has d8 square or something, so it's alright. Rook e1, we play king d8. After bishop f4, played on Givon Sutovsky, Israel 2019. Black can play knight d5, hitting the bishop. And very importantly, after bishop g3, we have the move h5, hitting, intending to hit the bishop with h4 as well, and very importantly, activating the rook. As I mentioned a few times in previous chapters, the issue with this uncastled king, besides the fact that the king is sometimes unsafe, the biggest issue usually is that the rook is not in the game. So here we solve that with h5. 15 rook e1 is critical, now we go king d8. B4 is the best move here by far, and that is to do with the fact that we otherwise want to play d5, bishop c5 in some lines. So here after b4, we play bishop e7, intending to develop our pieces with rook e8, c4, rook 8, rook e3. I just prepared this rook lift here. We go queen b7, intending to meet rook a3 with d5. These lines, I have to say that unfortunately they are unavoidable, and so we have to know them quite a little bit. This is a dangerous try, of course. Well, black has of course also a few options sometimes, so it's not so easy for white either. But of course, from black perspective, our king is a little bit weak, so this particular sub-chapter has to be carefully studied. So queen b7, intending rook a3, d5, important to have the move order right. Queen a4 is the move, and now bishop f8. And white has to deliver a perpetual, he has nothing more. Queen a5 check, queen b6, queen a8, queen b8. And white should repeat moves with queen a5 check. If he chooses to go into the endgame after queen b8, knight b8, bishop e8, knight e8, he is the only one taking risk here with 2 knights for rook. We are doing very fine. We control the this queen side little majority, and in the long run, the weaknesses on the king side, the doubled f pawns will haunt white. So the endgame is not good for white. Instead, he should just repeat moves here. I mean, endgames may be defendable, but it's not a winning attempt by white. Instead of turning cd, turning rook e1 is also there. Now we have to try and finish development with e6. At cd6, we have bishop takes f3, strong move, and after gf, queen b8, hitting both the bishop and the d6 pawn. So after e6, the best move is rook takes e4. That's a spectacular rook sacrifice. Already white sacrificed a piece, and now in exchange, making it a whole rook. Now black has 2 ways of recapturing. Both are all right. I chose knight e4 as main, but queen e4 is also fine. Matter of taste. White goes c6 in both cases. Here we have to go bishop e7. Knight d2, strong intermezzo before taking on d7. Queen cannot retreat to b7 directly, so we have to play queen d5. Now white takes on d7, knight d7, queen a4. And after queen b7, white has some compensation for exchange. This was played in Jones Mkhitaryan, Batumi 2018. White has a lot of options. We cannot castle on the next move, or at least, well, we can, but we will have to give up the knight. Yeah, in this position, white has options, but it's probably, well, not probably, it's for sure fine for black. Computer says it's alright. But it's a little bit less forced than taking with the knight. Certainly an option. Knight takes is another one. White has to play c6. We play knight b6. Have an extra rook, so white has to do something, of course. There are 2 things white can do here. Either check with c7, we play king e7. This has been played in Bernatsky Kirlishvili 2019. Knight d4, d5. Getting the d6 square for the knight. c4. White has to try and open up the position, of course. Now we give up a full knight just to keep the position closed. Knight takes c4, bishop c4, and king d7. We need to neutralize the dangerous c7 pawn. Of course, takes is losing. The easiest win is knight c6 check, I think, followed by queen d8. And so king d7 is a must. And now white plays queen f3, hitting the f7 pawn. We defend with knight d6. And now bishop b5 check is met by a strong move king c8. Black has to be quite accurate, of course. And after bishop f1, we play bishop e7, and we finish the development. And white has already come up with some creative ways of trying to hold this position together. 1624 has been played twice in Makshane-Svidler and Muzachuk-Harika. In Lausanne 2020 was game Muzachuk-Harika, and Makshane-Svidler was 2018 Bundesliga. Muzachuk and Harika, I think, were both well prepared here because they've played the rest of the game perfectly. Black played queen a5, provoking c4, which is very important. That after c4, queen a1, now the bishop f1 is no longer an option, so queen c1 is a threatening mate. So queen a5 first, c4, queen a1, now c7 check is the way, king e7, queen d1. Not just defending from queen takes c1 mate, but also threatening bishop g5, when the queen on a1 would be hanging. Black plays queen a7, moving the queen back out of this bishop g5 thing, but also threatening to win the pawn. White gives up pawn on c8. C8 knight is a good humor. C8 queen, of course, will be the same. Knight takes c8, and now knight d4. White prepares, in fact, a perpetual check, and after queen c7, knight c6, king e8, knight anywhere, king e7, knight c6 back. It's just a perpetual check, nothing more. And this all happened in the game Muzachuk-Harika. I suspect both players knew all of this by force, by heart. Sorry. Yeah, so in fact, both options are fine, and white is, white is either going for this perpetual or take some enormous risks. But an important line to know, definitely an important line to know. And I think it is sort of well, it is avoidable, but if you want to play the principled way, I think we shouldn't really avoid it. I mean, in theory, I think here you can make another move, like starting with e6, for example. Then you get an unfavorable version of things with bishops 2 and d4. Okay, 6 rook e1. e6, that's the clever move order that people discovered. They used to go b5, and then c4 was a thing. Then also at some point g5 was a thing. There's a funny story there. At some point, I said in an interview where Magnus got hit by g5 against Vasilij Topalov and lost the game. I said that my wife knew about g5, and it was true because my wife knew about g5 because we were preparing at some point for some game. First of all, she was also recording a series on Najdorf, which was a very, very long time ago. So my series is just completely different. Of course, theory in Najdorf moved so far ahead in the last so many years. But also my wife, Sofika Gormishvili, she's a strong international master, and she plays Najdorf herself. So at some point, she was preparing for some game, and we knew about this g5 idea. So I made this remark that I'm surprised Magnus didn't know g5 because basically all my family knew it. But that remark was not liked by some team members of Magnus. But one way or the other, b5, c4 is probably okay for black. There are various ways, like you could also take and play knight b6. The main sort of b8 here was played later tried, but basically black had come up with the idea to move order it with e6, c3, b5, bishop c2, and then c4. Instead of c3, white can try to be very clever and play a4, try to stop b5, and then play c3, bishop c2. Now we play b6. Very often, when you cannot push b5, they go a4, you gotta still develop the bishop, so you go b6, c3, bishop b7, and here there is one very, very nice idea that is after the move 9, queen e2. Point is that if white plays bishop c2, we go c4, we stop this d4 push. Now after d4, we'll not let him have his center. And if white tries to attack the the c4 pawn twice, we also protect it twice, basically. So this is just very fine for black. So white tried to be clever about it and play queen e2 first. And here there's a very, very strong novelty. In fact, this has been played twice by Peter Swidler. And I guess by now everybody knows, everybody at a high level knows, I mean, I guess Peter Swidler also knows, but it has not been played, the following new idea, despite it is shown by the modern computers. Very, very strong novelty here, a very important one as well. The move g5. Spectacular idea. Turns out all white's pieces are completely misplaced. As after knight takes g5, rook g8, knight f3, we hit him with d5, want to open our bishop, and after e5, knight h5, now the queen on e2 is horribly misplaced, and that's the problem. Knight f4 is incoming. These queenside pieces are still underdeveloped, so this is huge for black. g5 is absolutely huge. And after bishop c2, for example, it's not clear what to suggest for white. After g5, white is in deep trouble here already. Huge trouble. Bishop c2, we go g4, knight h4, now we have knight e4. The knight on h4 is attacked, and after bishop e4 we have d5. Both the bishop on e4 and the knight on h4 are attacked, and yeah, black is just much better. Pawn up for now. And the queenside on this knight on b1, bishop on c1 are still underdeveloped. So yeah, queen to g5, a huge note, just huge idea, and that's why white should play 9 and knight a3. And now the problem is that after g5, after knight takes g5. In this same line, after rook g8, knight f3, d5, e5, knight h5, now the queen is no longer on e2. That's the problem. So there is, if you remember, queen on e2 was getting hit after knight f4. So that's why knight f3 is avoiding this. After knight f3, we should play more modestly, just bishop e7, allow bishop c2, castle, allow d4. Excuse me, once again. A position where we allow d4, so this is one other position where we allow it. But here, what we have in return is that white has a horrible knight on a3. After cd cd, we can even use it directly by playing b5, creating some space on the queen side, and using the fact that after ab, yeah, the knight on a3 is pinned here. So this is a roughly balanced position. The knight on a3 is so bad that we get moral compensation for giving white the pawn center, and we are always ready to strike in the center either with e5, forcing a Spanish structure, or with d5, e5, knight e4, sometimes as the knight on a3 is out of play. So this is a very fine position for black. Again, it is very important to always take into account not just the pawn structure, but also the placement of pieces. Placement of pieces always gives context to the pawn structure. That's very important. 7c3 is critical. Now we play b5. c4 is no longer there in one go, so now b5 is fine. Here after a4, as I mentioned, again we go bishop b7. Now ab, rook 8, queen 8, bishop b5, bishop e4. White has nothing. We have a better version of this Hare Krishna line. So rook e1, e6 is included. And after a4, bishop b7, bishop c2, we go c4, we transpose. We transpose to 8, bishop c2, c4, a4, and bishop b7. The white has to go a4. He has to challenge our pawn chain. Of course, I should mention the move c4. Yes, we obviously are happy to stop the d4 move here. Compared to the lines we looked at in 4c3, the queen is on d1, not on e2, so white has an extra tempo, yeah, when he brings knight to g3. Though this position is also playable, of course, but this is principle here. b3, not so dangerous. You can play bishop b7, and we can hang on to this pawn, as you know, by playing queen c7 and rook c8, so it will never fall. a4 is critical, now bishop b7. And here white has two ways, essentially. He can either take on b5 first or play d4 first. Let's look at d4 first. First, cd d3, en passant, this is the whole point, of course. And now, if bishop d3, we can just go ba, queen a4, bishop e7. We want to castle, and we have a fine position. White has this. White lacks one central pawn, and yeah, we have good queenside. Good central control, and just a comfortable Sicilian type position. Queen takes d3 is more dangerous. Now we play knight c5, queen e2, and b takes a4. Knight takes a4 is falling to some rook takes a4 business, so we should be careful. B takes a4 is the way. Now white can play bishop e3 or e5. If he goes e5, we take on e5, knight e5. And here we should be a bit careful if we play bishop e7, rook d1, queen b6, white has rook a4, which is, by the way, okay for black, but it's a very tricky sacrifice. Of course, you have to know here exactly what you're doing. No need to allow it. We can play 14 queen d5, the easiest. And after f3, yeah, we have a choice. We can play knight f7, chasing the knight. Or bishop d6, which is very simple. After knight d2, we want to just take on e5, queen e5, bishop e5, rook e5, knight f7, and get a very fine endgame if the rook drops back. We go knight b6. Guard that pawn. It's not a huge pawn, but it's an extra pawn, and it compensates us for the lack of the bishop pair. So yeah, queen d5 is very simple. Turning bishop e3 is also critical. Now I played against Hikaru bishop e4. I thought this was the easiest solution, but after bishop c5, bishop c2, queen c2, dc, queen a4, queen d7. This endgame was a little bit unpleasant to play in rapid, and actually in rapid it was actually very unpleasant to play, to be honest. And yeah, he got a knight on c4. One of the knights, either this one or that one, and then at some point he doubled on the a file in the endgame, and yeah, it was not very pleasant. The knight on c4 was very pretty, and black position is a bit passive. So it was okay for black, especially if you play it very well. It's okay completely, but I got outplayed. I have to say, Hikaru won deservedly a good game. So it was my fault. I shouldn't have gone for this, or I should have checked a little bit more thoroughly. I trusted the computer assessment there. I thought, I'm still a pawn up, so I should be fine. But yeah, I slightly showed slightly sloppy work there by myself. But I learned from that. Now I recommend 30 knight f7. And there are two ways. Bishop c5, knight c5, rook a4. That's been played by against Nepo, and here Nepo played g6. And the idea is that after rook d4, black should go bishop g7. Jan mixed something up. He played queen 7. Bishop g7 is the point. Again, I should mention, of course, the exchange sacrifice. Yeah, it was intentional, and now the king would be quite poor on e7. So we ignore it. We play g6, rook d4, bishop g7. After e5, we take on f3, queen f3, and d5. And after c4, we can castle. And after c takes d5. White, of course, had to challenge our central pawns because e5 is just weak. c4 castle, c takes d5. We have the very strong move. Knight to d7. And there's nice tactic after de. We have knight takes e5. And there is intermezzo with knight takes f3 check. And if the queen moves, we still have knight f3 check. After queen takes d4, queen d4, knight f3. Yeah? So we still have this tactic. So that's the point of knight d7, and yeah, black basically regains the pawn here with a fine position. And if not bishop c5, but bishop d4 first, then we go e5, bishop c5, knight c5. If rook a4 here, then we play bishop c7. It's happened in Nepo Nakamura. Nakamura was white again. Here's Nakamura Nepo, Kolkata 2019, the same tournament where we played Hikaru. And after rook a2 castle, yeah, black had a fine position. He's got the bishop pair. In exchange for the slightly weak a pawn, but it can move to a5, and black is actually pretty fine there. Also, d5 break eventually is a thing. And if white takes on a4 with the bishop, not with the rook, then we take on a4, rook a4, bishop e7. Here white has c4. He's got some grip on the d5 square finally, but we have a lot of counterplay on the b file. We play bishop c6, rook a2, a5, knight c3, and now the smoothest is queen b8, intending to meet knight d5 with bishop d8 and short castle. The bishop will come to b6. Will be a very strong bishop. Yeah, it will be a huge upgrade compared to a7, and there will be always pressure along the b file on the weak b2 pawn. So here black's fine. And finally, we should look at 10, 8 is b5. Now we take on b5, rook a8, queen a8. Important take with the queen again, hitting that e4 pawn. And after knight a3, white trades the b5 pawn for the e4 pawn, bishop e4, knight e4. Knight b5 is always met by queen b7. Keeping an eye on the knight, hitting the knight on b5, and very importantly, preventing knight c7 fork. And the more accurate move order for white instead of knight b5 first is d3 first, and after cd knight b5, queen b7, queen takes d3, queen takes d3, c4 is also there. After queen takes d3, we play d5. And we are slightly behind in development, but next we play bishop c5. For example, after bishop f4 or after c4, we play bishop c5, and next we will castle, and the position will be totally sterilized and equal. If white plays b4, stopping bishop c5, we play bishop e7, and then we castle nonetheless. We just in time to finish development here. Again, this queen b7 here, not to panic, seeing the fork, just queen b7, keeping an eye on everything. We are fine. 16c4 was interesting, but Mamedov Karyakin played in Shamkir 2018, showed a forced equalizer after d5, intending bishop c5 and castle. White took cd ed, played queen b3, nasty move, threatening knight d6 check. But here black has a very strong move, knight dc5, hitting the queen, and after queen d5, yeah, things get simplified. Queen takes d5, knight c7, king d7, knight d5, bishop d6, and it's already clear that the d pawn will be traded for the b pawn, and after b4, knight b3 was very accurate, of course. E4 knight is hanging, but c1 bishop is hanging as well. After rook q4, knight c1, within a few moves, white traded the b4 pawn for the d3 pawn, and the game was essentially drawn. So, a lot of theory by now in this rook e1 setup, and as you can see, sometimes black has to be quite accurate. But at the end of the day, if we know our stuff, we're doing quite well. And besides that, we had seen all the different variations. It's been a long journey. I hope it's been insightful and instructive, and now you're no longer fearing this mighty 3 bishop b5 check. So thank you for watching the whole chapter, and see you in the next chapter.